And again, thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit through the webinar with us. I have a very special guest with us today, Ian Haddock. Ian is the Executive Director of the Normal Anomaly Initiative, and he is also the President of Impulse Houston. So he's going to be presenting HIV as a social and racial justice issue with us today. He's done a lot of work on this issue and is currently working on other projects. Hopefully he'll share a little bit about that throughout this presentation. But I look forward to sharing this presentation with you all and hopefully asking some really great probing questions on how we can begin to address these issues in the work that we do today. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Ian. Thank you, Ian.
All right, you can hear me good? Everything is good? Okay, cool. I try to have a decent setup. So welcome to this presentation on HIV being a social and racial justice issue. I'm hoping that we can come out of this conversation with some fun, interesting action items. They may not be that fun, but hopefully they will be. And so we're going to get right into it. So the objectives are today is to define racial and social justice in the context of HIV, to consider the intersections of trauma ascribed to people at the margins because of the micro-perspective foci of HIV, and to discuss how social determinants of health and social racial justice are aligned. I want to start with just community understandings. This conversation may get uncomfortable. Just lean into that. Uncomfortability is where growth happens. So definitely lean into your uncomfortability. And your feelings, perspectives, and ideas are valid. Some of this stuff that I am going to present is going to be fact-based. That does not change how you respond to it. Me leaning into the fact that people will have different responses and perspectives and feelings about all of this is why we're here. This is a dialogue and a conversation around an important topic. And so the third community understanding is we are all in this together. I would love for you all, if there's ever anything that you want to, interject, you want to speak up about, you want to, give information or ask for clarity around, definitely do that. So just a little bit about me before we actually get into the presentation. As Chris said, I am the Executive Director of the Normal Anomaly Initiative, where we use a social justice lens to address issues of stigma and health disparities of people in color and LGBTQIA+ folks through digital storytelling, outreach, and programming, with our vision to end the discrimination of LGBT folks and the epidemic of HIV through methods of performance art, digital media, and collaborations and consulting with community organizations, academic institutions, and policy. So we're really new into this, but I'm super excited to present some of the things that we've done with this lens. So we will start this journey by kind of finding a mutual definition for social and racial justice such that we can properly conceptualize this with HIV. I think it's really important to kind of like get a definition. So the Oxford definition of social justice is the objective of creating a fair and equal society in which each individual matters, their rights are recognized and protected, and decisions are made in ways that are fair and honest. The National Education Association is my favorite definition of racial justice. It's the systematic fair treatment of people of all races, resulting in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. So what is part of each of these? So racial justice has a focus on race, ethnicity, culture, environment, community, and relationships. So when we think about all of these things, it makes me think of one of the generalizations that many people have over Black people, that we love fried chicken and watermelon, which can only be half true because I only like fried chicken, can't stand watermelon. And what happens is many times, what happens many times in our communities is there is a plethora of spaces to go eat fried chicken. And there generally, in many Black communities, are a lack of sustainable food sources and or what we would call good, if you would, grocery stores with fresh produce and fruit and things like that. And so what will happen is, whether we like fried chicken or not, we end up at the fried chicken spot. And you have to wonder, is it about the fact that we love fried chicken? Or is it what's close in our neighborhoods based upon where we are, how we move around, and what we have access to? And so when we think about racial justice is including all of those generalizations going all the way into the thought of access to food. And then, of course, social justice has a focus on gender or non-gender, sex or non-sex, sexualities, physical presentation, and sense of normalcy. So a good a good example of that is I have a close friend that we've been working with. They are transgender non-binary. So they identify as both transgender and non-binary. That person, if you were to look at their presentation, presents masculine, but they are a transgender non-binary person. Many times when we talk about trans issues, they are the first person at the table. They are the first person ready to work. They are the first person ready to make moves, but they're overlooked in the space because they don't present transgender, right? And so social justice is the movement that includes all of them. It's the equity of everybody, including racial justice, right? So I wanted to start with that because HIV impacts, obviously. So a lot of this stuff y'all are already clear about, right? HIV impacts Black and brown race, gay and bisexual and other men who sleep with men, social. Black and brown race, cisgender heterosexual women, social. Black and brown race, transgender, social. Women of diverse sexuality, social. So first of all, this kind of speaks to the other saying that we hear so often, people don't see color. That baffles me. But even more so when we talk about HIV. Interestingly enough, this is much like the example of fried chicken and food deserts. Going back to that, the community I just moved from had Frenchies, Popeyes, KFC, and Timmy Chan's. Timmy Chan's is a local Houston favorite. We love us, well, I love me some Timmy Chan's. People don't really like Timmy Chan's specifically because they still have feathers on the chicken, but I enjoy that crunchiness too. But that was all in a mile radius. That was all in a mile radius of where I lived. And the nearest affordable and fresh grocery store was about 6 miles. So I lived in a place called Hiram Clark here in Houston, Texas. It's a thriving Black and brown community. It used to be specifically Black, but now it's Black and brown. And the closest good grocery store was Walmart. Walmart was in Pearland. You know, all of the good stuff is in the lands, woodlands and Pearland and things like that. And so I would have to get on the freeway and drive to Walmart, drive to Walmart in order to get food. And that was difficult. So guess what I ate? I ate a bunch of chicken. And old habits die hard. I moved to, closer into the city over the last 4 months, but I have more options. So I find myself eating a little better. I'm still obviously a big boy, but I'm eating better. I'm cooking more at home, most definitely. And I am thinking more about like walking because we have like trails and stuff over here. And this brings up the thought around HIV and how it impacts people, right? It's not that we have a predisposed ability to contract HIV. It's that based on societal norms and proximity to the need or desire to have sex or a connection, we generally have sex with people who look like us, who happen to be in our communities. If we also don't have normalized conversations around sex and sexuality and the spectrum in which it exists and the ability to value our bodies from a young age outside of our genitalia, then culturally humble care, information that is relevant to our needs, and or being oppressed by stigma will be a byproduct of all of that, right? So many times in this work, we focused on, and I love to talk about culturally humble care. I love to talk about having access to care. All of those things are really important. But if we are not intentional about having conversations about the value of your body, the responsibility you have to your community, what does sex look like? How is sexuality a spectrum? If we never get to that place, when we're doing this work around ending the epidemic of HIV, then we can really not end the epidemic of HIV because we're trying to put the cart before the horse. So when we even the context of our community being risky, it's not about our community being risky. It's about the fact that we're having sex in our communities who have higher viral loads because they don't go to the doctor. We don't get on PrEP. We don't have a high uptake on PrEP, and this doesn't stem from what we know now. It's what we've been taught in the past, and it's because we're trying to find value, i.e., the fact that in 2020 we still talking about and have to talk about Black Lives Matter. All of these things are intersectional, right? When we think about Black Lives Mattering, it has to also matter, when we're having this conversation around ending the epidemic of HIV. So I want to talk a bit about how would refocusing how we end the epidemic assist the movement. So I want to play two videos. The first video, is probably a video that you all may have seen before. It is a woman that's living with HIV in Jackson, Mississippi, the Deep South, and her journey to stay on top of her health despite stigma and access to care. And then the other will look at a statistic from almost a decade ago that honors and celebrates Black women. What I want you to look at is how can the resilience of Black women give us insight, because Black women always save us. How can the resilience of Black women give us insight to the fight to end the epidemic of HIV? And a more in-depth question is, if the second video was looking at liberation in the United States on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being shackled and oppressed, and 10 being complete liberation, where would this video of the statistic be held to? So once again, I'm gonna play two videos. One is about a lady living in HIV in the Deep South. The other one is gonna be about a statistic separate from HIV about Black women. And I want specifically people to talk to me about, if this video was about liberation, on a scale of 1 to 10, where would it fit and why? So let's watch.
HIV rates are declining in the United States due to prevention efforts and awareness. But in the Deep South, the epidemic continues to ravage African-American communities. The stigma of HIV has many suffering in silence. And Kenneth Craig reports from Jackson, Mississippi, a city seeing some of the highest rates of new cases.
A lot of the people that are HIV positive are afraid. They're afraid to speak out because they're afraid of the rejection.
For 12 years, Jacqueline Wilson has been living with HIV in a region of the Deep South that's in the throes of an epidemic some would rather just ignore.
Some of my family members who didn't want me around them because I was HIV positive.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the epicenter of the nation's HIV crisis has shifted to the South, which now has the highest rates of new HIV infections nationwide. Of the nearly 40,000 cases diagnosed each year, more than 50% are in the southern states. At Open Arms, an LGBTQ healthcare center in Jackson, Mississippi, Deja Abdul Haq and her team have witnessed the alarming trend firsthand. African Americans are most severely affected.
We have a high poverty rate. Our education systems are inadequate. Our healthcare systems are inadequate.
Health officials say southern states are behind in adopting new HIV prevention methods, and people are not seeking out testing, care, and prevention because of stigma. One of the biggest challenges in the Deep South is simply getting to a place that offers treatment. In many areas, the nearest clinic is easily dozens of miles away, and some patients have no way to get there. Open Arms' top priority is giving patients like Wilson access to the care they need, even taking them to their appointments.
If I don't have a ride, then I don't get to see my doctor.
People on the front line say the rest of the nation needs to open its eyes.
We collectively have to figure out a way to get to zero here. And if we can get to zero in Jackson, I believe the United States of America can say firmly that we have eradicated HIV.
She hopes with compassion and much more attention, they can get there.
Bye, beautiful.
Kenneth Craig, CBS News, Jackson, Mississippi.
I love that. And now we're going to watch this video.
For the first time, over 50% of young black women, 18 to 24, are enrolled in college. Half. Overall, this is from age 15 to forever. For the first time in the history of data collection by the National Center for Education Statistics, as reported by the U.S. Census Bureau, black women have surpassed every other group in this country based upon race and gender. What does that mean? For the first time in our history, African American women have surpassed all groups in college entrance based upon race and gender. That's right. African American women enroll in college more than Asian men, white women. You name the group, either race or gender, African American women are number one by the numbers. 9.7%. Historic and monumental. A number that I believe every mainstream media, if not mainstream, every black media outlet should be reporting. This is Black History Today. It's being made. Where is the press release? Where is the news outlet? Where is the media outlet that would give us just one slight tip of the hat that black women have set history, that black history is being made right now? We don't have to go back to Harriet Tubman. We don't have to go back to George Washington Carver. Their accomplishments are great, but what about is going on today that we can hold up in front of all African Americans to say, we are great today. That education, as though it's been valued in our history, is valued today even more so. It's not going to happen. I'm here to tell you today that African American women and African American men today are holding up the lamp that has always been a testament to blacks in this country. We have always valued education, if not more so today than any other time in this history. And as we close every episode, take this one to the bank. You need to ask yourself two questions. One, have I been lied to? And two, if I have been lied to, why?
So I want y'all to unmute, and I want to talk about that statistic. So that statistic is about a decade old, but it's an amazing, amazing statistic. So when you think about black women who always save us, black women on a scale of 1 to 10, finding out that they were at the top of college graduates and college admissions, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how liberated does that make black women? Mm-hmm.
7.
10, 7, okay.
9 for me.
9, okay. All you got to do is unmute, child, and say a number. They can't even see you.
8.
Okay.
8.
8, okay. Good, good. 2 more, and then I'll leave y'all alone.
7's coming in from the chat, 8.5.
Okay.
8.
Perfect. Okay. So basically, we're somewhere around about an 8.5 is probably going to be the median number. I mean, that's pretty liberating. You know what I mean? Um, so I would argue. It's, I'm sorry if y'all could. I know I asked y'all to unmute, but could y'all make sure y'all mute again because my attention span is so bad. So the reason why I showed that is because on one of these conversations, we were talking about what it's like to push against a Black woman, pushing against the system to try to live her best life and to get what we want, which is to keep her virally suppressed and to keep her in care and to all that kind of stuff, right? And then this one, which is a separate conversation around Black women being the most educated group by race and gender. What's interesting is when we talk about liberation, many times we talk about it as a pinpoint in time. And I want to make sure I'm clear. Both things are to be celebrated. Getting this wonderful Jackson lady, lady that lives in Jackson, I'm sorry, that's living with HIV, virally suppressed. That's important, personally. It's also an important point to document the fact that Black women are the most educated group by race and gender. These are a couple other things
HIV
that I
rates are
wanted to highlight that comes from that. The wealth gap, right? The wealth gap is huge still for non-degreed and degreed Black families, even when we highlight the power of education, right? The fact is, non-degreed white families' net worth is at 100K, and degreed white families are just under 400K, while non-degreed Black families' net worth is less than 20K, and degreed families' net worth for Black families are 70K. I didn't put where I got that from, but I'll make sure I note that when y'all are asking y'all questions in a second. But I'll bring that back. But that is a powerful thing to see when we're talking about this liberation of our people, right? And the justice for all, for Black and brown and anybody, for queer people. When we're talking about this justice, many times we see this, and once again, it's important to applaud the facts and applaud the moments, but we can't stop right there when we're talking about justice. We can't stop at one person being virally suppressed and not look at the traumas of the whole community and the disadvantages that come even when we do our best, right? If you only focus on the act, then you miss the conversation, right? And that is the message for public health today, right? This picture, I blurred it out because I don't want y'all to get in trouble at y'all home office. But what the picture is behind that is a man that's at work watching porn. And he's probably obviously getting caught at work watching porn. But the act, many times we get caught on this conversation simply around sex, simply around what happens after sex and how do we get tested and what the risks look like. But there's a whole other conversation around this white supremacy culture in which we live that public health hasn't been comfortable with having. There's a whole conversation around how social determinants can also be documented as the racial determinants of health that we often overlook. There's also this conversation around how this anti-Blackness and anti-immigrant and transphobia and homophobia shows up as white supremacy culture in much of the work that is done in public health, right? And so I want to have a bit of a talk back around that particular thing. So as you see, I've included racial after social with determinants of health, simply because It goes there. But social or racial determinants of health are any factors in our society, including poverty, physical and sexual abuse, lack of education, y'all know this, homelessness, stigma, addiction, violence, untreated mental health problems, lack of employment opportunities, powerlessness, lack of choice, lack of legal resident status, and lack of social support they all contribute to the transmission of HIV. White supremacy culture is the idea or ideology that white people and the ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions of white people are superior to people of color and their ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions. It came up for, that definition is from Showing Up for Racial Justice. So let's talk and let's be open. I know this is a bit of a difficult conversation, and understand this. When we talk about white supremacy culture, understand that because it says white, doesn't mean that everybody is not involved in white supremacy culture. Everyone, this is the very fabric of our country. And I want to be clear, it is not your fault that we live under a white supremacy culture, but it can be if you sit in it. It can be if you allow it. It can be if you stop it from doing the work that we were supposed to do. So, how does white supremacy culture play a part in social or racial determinants of health? Don't make me talk to myself.
So I do want to go back. Sharita posted a comment following the videos stating that she thinks it is also important to address HIV gatekeeping with HIV testing and treatment. Providers often have bias when offering PrEP and when testing and connecting people living with HIV to care. It is found in research that when offered culturally competent care, Black women are more likely to start and be retained in care. So that was something that she posted following.
That's good. Thank you.
Ian, what was the question again?
How does white supremacy culture play a part in social or racial determinants of health?
Ian, this is Stephen.
I was going to comment on Sharita's post, and I think what you have here connects to that, because as a healthcare provider, you have this hierarchy often that some people lead with, and you already have in your mind that you know what's best. But I feel like what she's speaking to is sitting and having that conversation with your client, with your patient, about what they think is best for them and including them in the decision making. And what you have here is when the culture of ideologies, when you think that you're better for someone, then you don't feel like you have to have a conversation. It's more like you're going to be a director in the relationship. So I feel like that this culture, the white supremacy culture, is embodied in that, and that's the disconnect in what keeps us from having such a hard time in getting people engaged in care.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Kendrick. I think I saw Stephen. Was it Stephen that was about to speak?
Yeah, sorry about that. I put myself back on mute. Hey, Ian. One of the things I was mentioning, we talked about that impact of white supremacy culture. When we talked about the word not being spread about this accomplishment, it is an amazing accomplishment. African American women are leading the pack in college enrollment. That should have been trumpeted everywhere. Sometimes what I've seen, I remember hearing from folks that work at Univision, and one of the reasons a lot of folks from Univision left there and went to Telemundo was because they got tired of the bosses from basically this Anglo culture running TV station, and sometimes they weren't open to hearing about running stories that the reporters thought were from the community, were deep interest to the community, but their bosses decided not to run those stories and focus on something else. And so, I was thinking about this not trumpeting this accomplishment that African American women have made with college enrollment, and I hear that it's a similar kind of situation. So calling the shots on what successes are shared, which can be empowering, and which ones shouldn't. That I think perpetuates white supremacy as well.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Thank you, Stephen. Anybody else?
If I could leave a quick thought, I really feel like when it comes to how white supremacy kind of plays a part, it builds on this hierarchy of patriarchy in a way where it's like, okay, man is the alpha, controls, rules. Women are subservient. They're the betas. They are really the ones who are just to please do the bidding or just answer to the man in a way. And when we play race into that, we go into like white supremacy saying white is the alpha, right? And then we probably get to black being the delta, right? Or just somewhere farther down in the hierarchy. So when we see that a black man is less, and then we say that a black man is in here like, okay, well, I'm the alpha, I'm in control, black woman, you are less in some households or some thoughts and frame of mind. So we have women becoming less and seeming more defenseless and seeming more to be subject to whatever the man is saying to do. And then when we get to black gay men exemplifying black woman kind of tendencies and mannerisms and traits and things like that, people kind of look at them like they are less. And then we get to black trans. I don't even want to have the conversation yet, because it's like, then we get to less. I don't know if you should be alive because you are looking like a black woman, and I don't know how to protect you. I don't know how to save you. I don't know what to do. And I'm not speaking to myself personally, but I was saying like this maybe in a black straight man's mind, like, I don't even know how you are able to be in society because you are so far from white supremacy. We don't know what to do for you. So I think that hierarchy plays a big part where we're saying like, oh, you are so far from what is normal due to white supremacy. I'm just going to leave that little note. I'm not going to take
That's good. Thank you, Joseph. I really appreciate that. That's a good point. Anyone else? I think we have time for one.
I have something to add. Hi, I'm Sharita Ambrose. I'm the one who put
How you doing?
Gatekeeping. So in your question is about white supremacy and how that plays part in our social determinants of health. For me, when I look at it, it's that whiteness is pervasive in everything, and that the absence of whiteness means that it's not as valuable. So when we're looking at social determinants of health, we're looking at a pathology of people saying that these 501c3s and or nonprofit organizations that set up in certain communities, they're there for numbers, they're there for, grant dollars or foundation monies, but they're not necessarily invested in these communities in which they are supposed to be serving. So when a Black organization sets up, there's twice as much scrutiny on that, even though they're a part of the conversation and the community in which they are supposed to be serving. So when we look at social determinants of health, it has become a buzzword for me anyways, when I look at it, to talk about people of color. They don't have all of these things, right? But our primarily focus is to only talk to them about testing. It's not necessarily to talk to them about anything else that's going on in their community. Therefore, a lot of the doctors, a lot of the providers overlook a lot of these populations because they're really busy trying to provide one service that they think people need. So like, I'm gonna throw a party and I'm not gonna ask you what you want at your party, but then I'm gonna get mad when you don't show up at my party. Mm-hmm. Well, you never asked the community in the first place, and you're thinking you know best for them, and that the absence of whiteness. And when I say absence of whiteness, I don't necessarily mean on the ground, because yes, they'll hire people that look like us, but when you look at leadership positions, you look at board positions, when you're looking at people who are actually making said decisions, they often don't look like the community in which they serve.
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. You had really took me there. Thank you, Sharita. That really blessed my soul. All of y'all are blessing my soul. Anybody have one last final thought? I kind of want to hear from Chris. But who else?
My name is Hosea, and
How you doing?
I'm going to piggyback off of what Sharita said. In terms of white supremacy and HIV care, or healthcare specifically, it's about, we think of it in terms of equality, but it's more so in terms of equity. And as Sharita said, there's individuals who are at the top of the hierarchy who are making decisions for communities of color, but there's no equitable state of people of color in those positions to provide culturally competent feedback and input in how to meet the needs of our own communities. And so when it comes down to white supremacy and white privilege, I see it more so from a standpoint of not necessarily, and I think it's twofold. Some people may see it from a standpoint of sympathy, and some people may see it from a standpoint of compassion. But I think for some of those entities and agencies and individuals who are making the decisions, they're making it from their viewpoint or their worldview of what they think we need and how it can make us equal and not equitable.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Chris, I'm gonna come to you. I appreciate that, Jose. I'm gonna come to you, but I'm gonna come to you after we talk about what how the Normal Anomaly, being a small organization, has implemented ways to do social and racial justice to impact ending the epidemic of HIV. So this is how we approach it. So we're a small organization, grassroots organization even. I probably won't be able to call us that too much longer, but I like being a grassroots organization because we like being on the field. We are ran, first of all, we are ran by, LGBT people, LGBT people of color, specifically Black LGBT people. People who are openly living with HIV. We have a trans woman. We have a lesbian woman. We are pretty cool. I'm glad to be leading and working with this organization, and they've been riding with me before we were an organization, when we were just a thought. So we have 2 programs. So our first program that we ever did was Outcry. So Outcry was a project, it's an ongoing project working with the Black Christian Church. And it started as a mini documentary and then a docuseries, and now it is a community project. We've figured out a way to turn digital storytelling into programming. By the way, Outcry, I would be remiss, my organization, people that are on here, would be upset if I didn't tell y'all that it is available on Prime Video. So you can go check that out. But we have built partnerships with our community project with churches using a social and racial justice construct. What we mean by that is, if you are in the South, which I'm guessing most of y'all are, since this is Achieving Together for Texas. If you're in the South, you know how churches look at us gays. Specifically, gay men around HIV. And so when we first went to the churches, because we were working with about 8 churches, 6 of them had no HIV outreach before. And we went to them and we were, we were crazy activists. You need to change your theology around, which is all things that I believe. You need to change your theology around us queers, around gays. You need to stop sending us to hell. I wrote so many think pieces and cried so many nights. I was on the phone with my aunt just cursing and upset because wasn't nobody listening to me, until I realized that it was a couple things that we needed to do if we really wanted to move the needle. The reality is, I truly believe, I have to sit on this call, and I know if you're in Texas, probably a lot of y'all are Christian. I am a Christian. I also am gay. I am a Black gay Christian. And that's what I sit in, and I don't feel any type of way about that, nor do I feel my life is a sin. But I understand that that is a deep-seated belief for many Christians that's been generations over generations, and we can talk about that trauma and how we need to peel back that trauma also. But what we really understood is that upwards of 83% of Black people identify with some level of Christianity. And although they are seeing a massive clearance of their churches because they are not moving in social and racial justice constructs, there are people that, you know, when they're having bad weeks or when they're having bad days, the first place that they want to go, well, maybe the second place, they probably go to the club first and get them some Hennessy or some Patron, but then they want to go to the church. And when they go to the church, depending on what's going on in the church, they're going to leave either feeling free and liberated for a moment, or they're going to feel more oppressed. And so knowing that a lot of people were going to the church, and that here in Houston, the church was an untapped territory, we had to figure out a way to use our harm reduction lens to implement change while desexualizing HIV. For one, that's not to say that we aren't sex positive, but for this particular project, and what I mean by harm reduction lens to desexualize HIV. So when we think of harm reduction, we generally think of harm reduction in the context of substance users. And so, you know, if you've taken any harm reduction training, you know that for substance users, many substance users don't feel like they're doing anything wrong. You know, they're adults, they're making a conscious decision to use substances, and they don't understand why they're being penalized, stigmatized, and criminalized for doing something that they choose to do where they're not inviting anyone else to do it. And so many states, not necessarily Texas, other than underground, have syringe exchange programs. And a lot of the conservative conversation is, why would you give them needles such that they can use their drugs? And the response to that is because they're going to use the drugs anyway. Why not lower their risk for other opportunities for infections and or viruses or transmitting anything by giving them clean needles. And it's been proven to work. So we use that same lens, and we've flipped it from like the substance use kind of idea to our work, specifically with the Outcry Project. What we do is we've went into the churches and we've talked about how this is as much of a part of the Black Lives Matter movement as anything else. And also it's impacting the communities in which you serve. And we talk about how not only is it impacting gay men, it's impacting Black and brown women. And y'all are willing to go into the church that you're seeing here is one of our main churches. They got the second Sunday in November. Well, us together, we got the second Sunday in November in Houston, proclaimed as Church HIV Testing Day. Hopefully we can do it more often than the second Sunday in November, but currently that's what we are. And this pastor is a social justice activist. He's all in the strip clubs, talking to the prostitutes. Sex workers. I'm a former sex worker, so I still have some of my old language. But going into the strip clubs, talking to sex workers about Jesus. So I said, if you feel strongly about Jesus enough to go into the strip club, then you should at least be able to get people tested because you're recognizing sex, right? And so we've used that in order to really impact that particular space, because the church, as we know, has been a cornerstone of the Black community. Even when you think about the civil rights era, where everything came through the church. It's where the people met to organize and to galvanize, right? And so we wanted their involvement around ending the epidemic. We think it's really important. And then this is our baby. This is our baby. This is our Trans Ally Collective. The Trans Ally Collective uses a healing justice and harm reduction lens in tandem to build a coalition. So the Trans Ally Collective, we started this project about a year ago, probably about a year and a half ago. We went to our Black trans community and said, hey, how can we protect you? Tracy Single was found here in Houston, dead, and they couldn't find her name or any information. And we were at a vigil where we found out, you know, they passed around her postmortem pictures, and the community was able to identify her. And me and my team, we were sitting there like, what can we do? What can we do? And we went to talk to our Black trans women, and they said, we need a space to talk this out without any cis people around. And we were like, oh, well, I guess we can't be of any help. And after they talked and they saw that we were willing to do what they wanted to, we allowed them to lead this and guide this entire collective. From the focus group, we were able to talk to over 28 Black trans women to find out what
Ian, if you're able to hear me, I think you froze up there for a few moments.
Oh, am I back? Am I back? Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I don't know where I stopped, but I'm just gonna keep on going. So the Trans Ally Collective, so we allowed them to lead everything in this movement. In terms of the focus groups, we did some public service announcements, we did press conferences, and as you see, right now at this very moment, in 5th Ward, Houston, Texas, we have a huge billboard that says, protect Black trans women. Interestingly enough, the colors on that flag is the flag that one of the trans-led organizations here in Houston called Saving Our Sisters United Incorporated. They said that the trans flag doesn't represent Black trans people, and it many times pushes them out. And so these are the colors of the Black trans flag that they have created. And it's in 5th Ward, Houston, because many times trans women are murdered by people they know, and people that they are in sexual relationships and or relationships with. And so we wanted to do this in the state that is unfortunately called the trans murder capital of America. We wanted to really do our part in protecting Black trans women. And though this billboard is obviously performative, it got the conversation started. It got the media attention in a time where they're not talking about this, but during Pride Month, 7 to 8 trans people died. But we are really doing the work to sacrifice our privilege, because as the third point says, the required sacrifice of privilege is ever present in this allyship. When you are building your communities using this social and racial justice construct, if you are a part of the system, which we already talked about, how the white supremacy culture, it adopts you even if you don't want to be adopted. If you are in a position of power, likely you will be in, likely if not rightly, you will be a part of the white supremacist culture. And so I have had to learn, I'll be honest with you guys, I've had to learn how to be an ally, because there were moments when I, like for instance, my barber, who is a straight man, I always go to him. I went to him the other week, and he had saw the billboard. And he's cool, he's progressive. He wanted to have a conversation about protecting Black trans women, but everybody in the barbershop was not as progressive. And me being by nature an introvert, I wanted to clam up and or run out of the barbershop. But I kept on thinking about, this means more. And this is more than my job and more than my performance and more than a target and more than testing, right? And so because of that, I had to stand flat-footed and talk about the importance of protecting Black trans women. And lastly, I've never talked about HIV in this conversation around protecting Black trans women. And I rarely talk about HIV to trans women, specifically Black trans women, when we're having this conversation, but it's a part of the work. it is about what is priority. The priorities that our focus group said for them was employment, competent medical and mental health care, allyship, and housing. Those are their priorities. And a Black trans woman said, and I quote, "You can't speak to me about HIV when stepping over my threshold means I can get shot in the head." So it's very hard to have this conversation if we aren't prioritizing the needs of the community, because by protecting them from death, then we make sure that they can live valuable lives past the age of 30 to 35, which is their life expectancy. And then that in turn helps with how they walk through and negotiate sex. We were talking about negotiation of sex. I told y'all a second ago that I'm a former sex worker. We were talking about how to negotiate sex long before we had the terminology, right? But that's because we learned the value of our lives as a cis man. So if we can give that same value to our trans women, then I think we will be in a really, really good space. So our last 7 or 8 minutes, I want to just talk through these. These are really, I think, high-level questions. I think they're kind of hard to answer. And I'm not about to tell you I have the answers. That's why we're talking through it. But to end this, using racial and social justice, how can we be more open? And you all can unmute and answer any one of these questions, so that so we can collectively leave here feeling like we have some actionable steps from this presentation. But using social and racial justice, how can we be more open to allowing people most impacted by HIV tell us what they need? Consider how white supremacy culture plays a part in ending the epidemic, and what changes can we make? Be more supportive to expanding the scope of public health as it relates to its focus of HIV, and be more inclusive to the social and racial justice movements in our work, i.e., how we don't see color, but we should.
I like the idea that you guys had, which is providing space. Sharita Ambrose again. But I'd like the idea of providing space. I think sometimes certain populations, whatever subset or whatever population you're a part of, you just want to have space where you do not have to explain or, kind of saying, well, if I'm talking about being Black, not all white, I don't have to say that in a room of people that look like me that have the same, or want to have the same kinds of conversations that I'm having. So I think something as simple as opening up space. A lot of organizations have space, but they just kind of want to be involved in that process and saying, we have space for you, here you can have it, and we're going to take our hands off it. And then when you're ready to give us whatever it is that you want to let us know, that we'll be there to support you in whatever that is. I think that a lot of populations, like what I find in Austin, I used to live in Houston, I worked in Houston, I now live in Austin, and what I find is that Black people in Austin often seek out, search, and want to have a space that we can be our authentic selves without having to over-explain or walk back or, attend to certain people's feelings that can derail a conversation. So I think what is really helpful for a lot of organizations to start with is to provide space and lead people to that space to do whatever they feel like they need to do in that space.
Oh,
good. Yeah. Hey, Ian, this is Stephen Vargas. Sharita, I haven't seen you forever. I love hearing your voice. I've missed hearing it. But I was going to say something similar to what Sharita said, but essentially it reminds me, when you shared your example about providing that space, and the trans community said you didn't want any cisgender folks part of this conversation, y'all stepped away. The thing about that was taking ownership of what we do. As good leaders bring other people to the table. Good leaders provide the space for other folks to get done what they need to get done so they can join the collective and we can all move forward again. And so that's exactly what you described with earlier. And so one thing was take credit for what you've done, for one. We all need to be doing that. Particularly people living with HIV, you need to take credit for what we've done. It's all that good stuff. The second thing was it exemplified that principle of good leadership. You know, not only did you bring them to the table, you stepped away from the table so they could have their time to have that talk. It was their space. Those are things I think, again, need to be shared, need to be promoted as something worth emulating to create more spaces for folks who don't have space to, you know, get things done. So yeah.
That's good, Stephen. Thank you. Thank you. I love that. Any other thoughts on these questions? I want to hear from Chris this time too.
Thanks, Ian. I think, well, I have a couple of comments, honestly, because I think one of the things that you were talking about when you're talking about the social determinants of health is something that Dr. Kamara Phyllis-Jones has kind of coined as social determinants of equity. And so these are the environments or the situations within our environments that create the context for inequities to persist. And so if we can't talk about racism, if we can't talk about how our communities have been built the way that they are, where, you know, with segregation and redlining and why there's mass incarceration, if we can't identify the root causes of all of that, then we will continue to have these inequities persist. And then that also goes to kind of the conversation about understanding history and looking at things with historical context. And someone else posted in the chat a while back that, you know, we tend to ignore why certain communities may have medical mistrust and ignore the fact that there have been things that have been done to communities of color, both legally and illegally, within our country and outside of our country, but that have been supported by our country, that has hurt us. And so there's that mistrust that is there. There have been laws that were created and designed to keep communities of color, and specifically Black Americans, down, and continue to incarcerate Black people for not having a job, for having very small, minor crimes that led to, you know, life terms in prison for free labor. And so we have to understand that historical context. And so if we're looking at ways that we can begin to address white supremacy culture, we also have to keep in mind how these messages that we've heard throughout years have been internalized within ourselves and within our communities, and why, you know, the whole trope or stereotypes of angry Black women is a thing, and how that's being used now on Kamala Harris, where, you know, if she were a white cis man, the question of her qualifications to be vice president wouldn't even be, you know, a thing. But because we have these stereotypes, and people who do not have a lot of exposure to people of color, they only have what they hear and what they see as their justification or their basis for how they treat people of color, begin to believe all of these things. And so we have this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where people, you know, internalize things, people hear things, communities of color are disproportionately represented negatively on news and in media, and all of that affects the way we behave and the way we interact. And so there's this saying of that, like, if we approach an issue and we believe we already have the answer in mind, everything we see is going to point towards that answer. And so when we're working with communities of color, Black communities specifically, who are disproportionately impacted by various health inequities, then it's easy for us to begin to blame the community or blame the individual if we're not looking at the historical context, if we're not looking at how these environments were built in a way that created these inequities in the first place. And so we have to begin to identify our own biases, understand the history of our country that is often ignored, that created the environment we're in order to move forward. So sorry, that was my long-winded response, but yeah.
I am fine. I am fine with it. I'm fine with it. And I think that's a great place to close. I wanted to hear from more of you all, but a part of a part of the work that I do around dismantling white supremacy is valuing my people's time. That means that I try to start on time and I do my best to end on time because you all have things to do. With that being said, I am your servant leader, Ian L. Haddock. You can find out more information about me at www.normalanomaly.org. And actually, when you go there, you'll see more about the organization, but you'll also see me. And any other information you want to find out about the Trans Ally Collective, you can go to our website, transallycollective.org. Join our mailing list. We'll begin playing with our mailing list next week and talking about how to join the collective. In this virtual world, I'm also available for speaking engagements by emailing me at info@enlhaddock.com. And please let me choose what I do for free. Amen. And that's it for me. I'm shooting it back to Chris. Thank you all for your time.
Yes, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit with us today. We do have another presentation in 2 weeks by Tyreek Daniels, who is the executive director of What's in the Mirror, and he's going to be speaking with us about healing justice. So please look for communication about that. Otherwise, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and we will hopefully join each other again soon on another webinar as we continue to learn. Thanks, Ian.
Have a good day.